Where are all the black people in comics? So writes composer Carlos Simon in the score of his piece Motherboxx Connection, which begins this dynamic concert. It's a question posed by the creative duo Black Kirby, who use their stories to show black people as heroes, using ancient customs from the African and African-American diaspora. In these Afrofuturistic stories, the Motherboxx is a living computer, a being sensitive to black people's societal struggle, and a store of cultural tradition, the technological equivalent of the motherland in the black diaspora imagination. Carlos's short, ecstatic piece is a musical picture of this futuristic cultural computer. It begins with fanfares before we hear a simple, easily recognizable motif that repeats through the work. The music is fast, brilliant, and colorful. It was originally the first movement of a longer work, a folklore symphony, commissioned in 2022 by the Sphinx Organization, a group that works to place young musicians of color in American symphony orchestras. I'm very pleased that the Jacksonville Symphony employs many of their musicians each season. Carlos Simon is one of the leading composers of his generation, with a huge number of commissions from orchestras and chamber music groups around the world. His music is rooted in his own musical history. His father is a pastor, and the influence of black gospel and jazz is never far away. His introduction to classical music came through movies and through his grandmother's enthusiasm. When he was about 10, she bought him a Masterpieces of Classical Music CD that included the famous second movement of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony. By high school, Simon took for granted he would be a classical pianist and composer. We're including this exciting work as a foretaste of more to come. We will end this classical season with a brand new work by Carlos, written especially for Jacksonville, entitled Zodiac. So I hope Motherboxx Connection whets your appetite for more, while introducing you to Carlos Simon's eclectic brilliance. We follow that with another American masterpiece, George Gershwin's Piano Concerto in F. 100 years ago, Gershwin wrote his iconic work for piano and orchestra, Rhapsody in Blue. You might remember we commemorated that anniversary with performances here in January, featuring our artist-in-residence, pianist Conrad Tao. The success of the Rhapsody was so great that the conductor of the New York Symphony at the time, Walter Damrosch, immediately contacted Gershwin and asked him to write a piano concerto for him. Gershwin took the opportunity to try his hand at writing a more standard classical concerto in the traditional three movements, fast, slow, fast. His own introduction to the piece is fascinating. The first movement employs the Charleston rhythm. It is quick and pulsating, representing the young, enthusiastic spirit of American life. It begins with a rhythmic motif given out by the kettle drums. The principal theme is announced by the bassoon. Later, a second theme is introduced by the piano. The second movement has a poetic, nocturnal atmosphere, which has come to be referred to as the American blues, but in a purer form than that in which they are usually treated. The final movement reverts to the style of the first. It is an orgy of rhythms, starting violently and keeping to the same pace throughout. The piece was a major achievement for Gershwin. Unlike Rhapsody in Blue, he orchestrated it himself. And while most other composers of the time were turning to European modernism for inspiration, Gershwin authentically stuck with that he most admired: America's greatest musical contribution to the world, jazz. For these performances, we're taking the Jazz Connection one step further. Instead of just a piano soloist, as the piece is usually performed, we'll be joined by the Marcus Roberts Trio, with Marcus on piano, the famous Jason Marsalis on drums, and bassist Roland Gurin. To add to the evening's star power, the concerts will be conducted by the music director laureate of the Atlanta Symphony and the music director of the Fort Worth Symphony, my dear friend and mentor, Robert Spano. We're in for a treat. Our programme ends with perhaps the most beloved, popular and dramatic symphony of all, Tchaikovsky's Fifth. Tchaikovsky occupies a very special place in Russian musical history. The generation before him included a group of composers known as the Mighty Handful, who were deeply nationalistic, creating the first Russian school of classical music. But they weren't all conservatory trained. not fully professional, as Tchaikovsky himself once put it. Tchaikovsky, on the other hand, was rigorously changed in the new Russian musical conservatories, which naturally emphasized European classicism, meaning Brahms and Beethoven. And of course, like every other composer of the day, he had to deal with the inescapable, massive influence of Richard Wagner. But despite this European training and influence, Tchaikovsky was deeply committed to his own national music culture. The Fifth is, in many ways, a balancing act between native and foreign musical influences. It's not deliberately nationalistic, but it is nonetheless deeply Russian from first note to last. In his symphonies, Tchaikovsky was often torn between his respect for classical form, he idealized Mozart, and the desire to tell some kind of story in a vaguely programmatic way. The Sixth Symphony is the greatest example of this, but the Fifth also has an extra musical meaning. When he was drafting its plan in 1888, he made a note. Introduction. Complete resignation before fate, or, what is the same thing, the inscrutable designs of Providence. So the work's unspoken drama could be said to be the inescapable inevitability of fate and its tendency to bring the unwelcome. The symphony begins with a motive that will come back in each movement representing fate itself. Darkly intoned by the clarinets and low strings, it sets the stage for an emotional drama of the most romantic nature. The following main theme of the first movement is a lilting dance in two, at turns nervous, dark, and euphoric. The second movement begins with some of the most beautiful chords Tchaikovsky ever wrote, played richly by the strings before the principal horn enters, with one of this composer's most captivating melodies. We seem to be on safer ground, but the fate motif comes crashing back, slashing any sense of optimism. The third is a waltz, one of his finest. I always think the title of Waltz King is unduly given to Johann Strauss. For me, it's Tchaikovsky who deserves that prize. Immediately tender and alluring, we're transported into the elegant atmosphere of a Belle Epoque ball. But even here we can't escape fate, as the clarinets intone the motive in a sinister moment towards the waltz's end. The overriding drama of the symphony returns in the finale, opening with the strings intoning the fate melody, but now in a major key, as if somehow the struggle of the previous movements has brought an escape from our fateful conundrum. After a particularly Slavic main allegro, the coda leaves us in no doubt of the composer's triumph as the fate motive returns in the full orchestra, now full of joy, turned into a celebration of life and love.